All right, we're just gonna let folks roll in for a minute before we start. Oh, there they go.
Hey.
Hey, everyone. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're from, what's going on.
Hello.
Here in Pennsylvania, it is a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day.
Yeah, we're having
Allergies, not so fun, but
true. We're finally having spring.
yay.
All right. Um, Hi, Katie. Hey, Janice. Thanks for coming, guys. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And before we do, I'm going to just go over a couple of things, and then I'll pass it over to Carla. So, welcome to our webinar about advocating for your child with CCM. We will have a Q&A towards the end of the session, and we use the Q&A feature at the bottom rather than the chat. So please put your questions into the Q&A if you can. Also, I did not introduce myself. Hi, I'm Darla. I'm the Patient Affairs Director for the Alliance to Cure Cavernous Malformation. I have CCM myself, and so do both of my kids. So I have personal experience on the other side of the table, advocating for my own kids with CCM. So I think it should be a really interesting Q&A with Carla and I. All right, I think that's all my, oh, and we have support group. So right after this meeting, we have our support group. I will drop the link a couple of times during the meeting, and hopefully you guys can join us. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Carla. Carla Miller is a dedicated professional with 18 years of experience in school psychology, special education, counseling, consultation, and advocacy. She's a certified school psychologist and licensed educational psychologist with certifications in Pennsylvania, Delaware, California, Maryland, and Michigan. Carla holds a BA in psychology from the University of Delaware, an MA in counseling psychology, and an EdS in school psychology from Immaculata University. Throughout her career, Carla has worked tirelessly to support students, educators, and families, particularly in the areas of education, disability awareness, and mental health, with a deep commitment to inclusive practices. She has worked extensively in both public school systems and private practice, advocating for students with special needs. As an adjunct professor, Carla also played a vital role in shaping the next generation of school psychologists and mental health professionals. In 2023, Carla was diagnosed with cavernous malformation, a rare brain condition, and today she is a proud CCM survivor and warrior. Her personal journey has further fueled her passion for advocacy, and she remains a resilient voice for others with disabilities. Outside of her professional life, Carla enjoys spending quality time with her family, friends, and beloved dog Tucker. She's passionate about learning, listening to music, and creating artwork. Carla also volunteers for the Epilepsy Foundation of Eastern Pennsylvania and the Alliance to Cure Cavernous Malformation, where she advocates for herself and others living with disabilities. Carla's story is one of strength, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to both her professional work and her advocacy efforts, making her an inspiring figure in the fields of education, disability studies, psychology, and mental health. That was the long version. I'm sorry. Carla, I know you gave me a short one too. I read the long one.
That's okay. I appreciate it.
There was so much good stuff in there. So,
Aw,
well, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Carla. Thank you so much for being here, Carla. We really appreciate you taking the time.
and I thank you, and the Alliance, and everybody who is here tonight. I'm gonna get to share my screen here, and okay, can we see that, Darla?
Not yet. There we go. Now we
Okay,
see.
it's on lag.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So, hello, everyone. My first two slides, Darla pretty much covered, but just briefly, I just want to say hello to everyone. I see we have people from all over the world, which is really exciting and nerve wracking at the same time. But I wanted to just say that I'm pleased to be here. And that I will be focusing tonight or today, wherever you are located, on advocating for your child with CCM. So, as Darla said, I was a school psychologist and mental health clinician for about 17 to 18 years. Um, and I have always been passionate about advocating for children and families. In 2023, which surprisingly was just 2 years ago, and it was actually this month when everything started happening in 2023. And I was unexpectedly diagnosed with cerebral cavernous malformation, commonly known as a cavernoma, CAV-MAL, cavernous angioma, and that was during a routine MRI that I got just due to some neurological symptoms, and that so they figured it out at that point. Next, okay. Oopsie. Okay, so who am I? Again, as Darla mentioned, I went to University of Delaware, Immaculata, and I got my educational specialist in school psychology. So I'm certified in 5 states. I also taught in the social and behavioral sciences at Wilmington University for about 10 years, face to face and online. So I've done the teacher thing, but not in the schools. Just really guiding teachers to do what's best for children. And then my likes, they have changed. It took me a long time to try and figure out what was important to me, because my definition of fun and hobbies and likes has drastically changed since my diagnosis in 2023. But I enjoy spending time with my friends and family, and Philly sports for anybody out there from Philadelphia or surrounding areas. I love the Eagles and the Phillies, and I love dancing. I love listening to music, and I love learning. I'm a nerd at heart. It's a little bit harder to learn these days, but I try to keep up to date on everything. Okay, so my story and how I became involved with the Alliance to Cure Cavernous Malformation. In April 2023, I experienced severe headaches and eye irritation, leading to a neurology related emergency. After extensive tests in the ER and neuro ICU, I was diagnosed with CCM that had hemorrhaged in my brain. Over the next few months, I suffered seizures as the lesion grew, eventually requiring a risky craniotomy for removal. Now, as a CCM warrior and survivor, I am passionate about educating others on this condition. Okay, so our objectives for today's webinar are, I'll just read through them. Number one, we're going to discuss the brain pretty quickly and the common difficulties that an individual with CCM may face in the school settings, specifically in the school setting, because that's where my expertise is. Number two, define areas of cognitive difficulty and identify practical strategies to improve school performance. Number three, determine how to best access school-aged services. And number four, identify how to advocate for your child with CCM, whether you're a parent, an educator, or just somebody interested in advocating. This should be helpful. So I also wanted to note, importantly, during the presentation, I will try to use the abbreviation CCM when appropriate, but sometimes I will be using some of the following terms interchangeably. So when I say that, I mean the CCM, cavernous malformation, cavernoma, CAV-MAL, ABI, which is acquired brain injury, and then TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury, and etc. So they're all going to mean the same thing within this presentation, and you'll see why in a bit. Okay, so here is a map of the brain. And so the symptoms of cavernous malformation, hemorrhage specifically, depend on its location and size. Cavernous malformations can cause attention, memory, social skills, mood, and learning problems, particularly if the lesions are in the frontal, parietal, or temporal lobes, or in the cerebellum, even without obvious bleeding. And this is particularly true for individuals with many lesions throughout the brain, specifically like familial type of CCM. And then I have over here a interactive brain map. And so when I am finished here, I will provide this slideshow to Darla, and she can share it with you if you are interested. And you can click on that brain, and it brings you inside to different areas to give you more information on each of those areas of the brain and what they're responsible for. So quickly going through this, the frontal lobe is involved in initiation, problem solving, judgment, inhibition of behavior, planning, anticipation, self monitoring, motor planning, personality emotions, awareness of abilities and limitations, organization, attention and concentration, mental flexibility, and speaking. So expressive language, how one person expresses themselves. I'm going to jump over to the parietal lobe because they're on the top, and also because my specific lesion was in the frontoparietal lobe, and then started to grow on the motor cortex. So this is what I've been really involving myself with learning about. So the parietal lobe is involved with the sense of touch, differentiating size, shape, and color, spatial perception, and taste and smell. So a sensation, basically. The occipital lobe is vision, visual perception, recognition of printed words, which is important in learning. The cerebellum in the back, which is the balance, coordination, and skilled motor activity. And then the brain stem, which for you STEMmies out there, that is involves the breathing, heart rate, arousal, consciousness, sleep and wake functions, and attention and concentration. And then finally, the temporal lobe, memory, hearing, understanding language. So that's something we call receptive language in schools. So understanding what you're hearing, and then organization and sequencing. And as you can see, there's some overlap, especially with like attention and those executive functioning pieces, which we will discuss more in a moment. Okay, CCM in the brain. So we just discussed that location and size of CCM influences outcomes. So what are some other factors that influence outcomes? The age, I took that at injury out because this is more about like a traumatic brain injury, but age is definitely a factor as to like how it influences your outcomes. How severe is it? Like how many are there? What type it is. So is it incidental or sporadic or familial? And then your family and your environment, and then access to healthcare and community resources, and then individual characteristics of that person. You will find out how resilient you are when you face this. So that's important to learn as a skill. So the educational definition of traumatic brain injury, or CCM, which is where we would fall under, this is the specific category that we would look at if we were going to provide services in special education. And so this actually was just added, and I just looked it up right before 1990, which seems like a long time ago, but it's relatively a newer addition to the definitions of disabilities within the school. And so before we couldn't choose this category, but at this point we are now able to, you just basically qualify as long as you have a CCM and it's adversely impacting your education. So TBI is an acquired injury to the brain caused by an external force, sometimes like surgery, resulting in total or partial functional disability, psychosocial impairment, or both. And it has to adversely affect your child's educational performance. It does not apply to brain injuries that are congenital or degenerative. And again, like verbiage, yes, we are born with these, but it's not like congenital. It doesn't really matter. It counts as as a TBI. CCM does, and then it applies to open or closed head injuries. So that's how we could qualify whether they're surgery or not surgery. Um, and it has to impact at least one or more of the following areas. And I'm going to jump to that. Okay. So in addition to the criteria above, the student must demonstrate deficits in one or more of the following areas. The two main areas we'll be discussing tonight are physical and cognitive. Physical we'll be discussing briefly because I know this much about that, but also the cognitive piece is something that we don't always recognize and focus on. The other areas that we could say the student demonstrates deficits in are reasoning, perception, attention, problem solving, judgment, abstract thinking, going around, information processing, motor, speech, language, sensory, memory, and then psychosocial behavior. Okay. Next, physical difficulties, sometimes associated with CCM. Now, before I say this, if there are any physical difficulties, I would certainly suggest advocating that a nurse be part of the team. They should be. Schools don't always know what to do with TBI and physical difficulties or injuries or deficits. So a nurse makes sure they're part of the team, and during the team meeting, you should have a physical therapist and occupational therapists there. They deal with gross motor and fine motor skills, which I'll kind of describe it in a little bit. And then possibly an APE, which stands for an adaptive physical education teacher. So they can adapt what the curriculum is that children are participating in physical education, which I used to call gym, but and then an orientation or mobility specialist if your child has a problem or difficulties navigating the environment or need different ways to get to classes or organizing classes closer to one another. But the physical difficulties associated with CCM are speaking, vision, hearing, other sensory issues, headaches, migraines, fatigue, lack of fine motor coordination, and that's like your how your eyes and hands work together and how you like hold a pencil and write. And then it could include a spasticity of muscles, especially in when a seizure occurs, or sometimes that's an impact aftermath. Balance, gait, which is how you walk, and your coordination, and then paresis or paralysis, and then it also impacts sleep. So we want to like be cognizant of that during the school day. If a student is tired and they have CCM or TBI, we want to make sure that we incorporate breaks or discuss like a possibility of homeschooling until they build their stamina up. Okay, next, common cognitive deficits in CCM. So this is basically what I have been focused on my entire career, not on this side of things, but now it's even more interesting to me. But the common cognitive deficits in individuals with CCM include, but are not limited to, executive functioning, information processing, attention, learning and memory, behavior and social emotional functioning, and communication. So we're going to get into each one of those in much greater detail. So what is executive functioning? It has a lot to do with the frontal lobe, but it's basically in all areas of the brain, some type of or some function of the executive functioning. So use these skills every day to learn, work, and manage daily life. Trouble with executive function can negatively affect one's, and I'm just going to go through the list here: response inhibition, which is a fancy way of saying self-control, working or short-term memory, emotional control, cognitive flexibility or problem solving, sustained attention, so focusing and then maintaining attention to task. So can you follow through with that? Planning before beginning. So you want to figure out the who, what, when, where for projects, tasks, and assignments. Time management, prioritization. So, figuring out what is the most important task within a project, or and then completing that task and then moving on to the next most important. And then organization, goal setting and goal directed persistence, completion of tasks and projects, and then something fancy called metacognition, which is the awareness and control of your own cognitive processes. So this is how you're able to monitor your plans and then evaluate your own learning strategies, which we can teach as adults to children, and then that should transfer over if we're doing it correctly for them to be able to be their own self-advocate later on. And then self-regulation and self-correction. So next we're going to talk about some strategies for executive functioning deficits. So this list includes some helpful strategies to use in school or even at home. If you're watching this as an adult and you don't know any children with CCM or any kind of brain injury, these are also helpful for us to do as adults. I have many strategies all around the house, and hopefully one sticks. So I'm just going to briefly note some of the strategies they have here, and these are, again, only a couple of them. There's like hundreds of ideas, but I like number 2 because we are in an electronic technological society. So tools like iPads, smartwatches, visual timers, and laptops. There's so many ideas and like apps and stuff that help with that. If you just type it in or go into like accessibility, they're really coming out with some neat ways to help us get through our day. And then I liked creating story maps. So this is like for visuals, always like pairing your wording with visual, maybe for reading assignments, or even like graphic organizers to kind of figure out what you want to plan if you're writing a story. And then like to-do lists. I have checklists and post-it notes everywhere. So that's one of the ones that I'm a big fan of. Okay, next is information processing. And this is the brain's ability to receive, interpret, and respond to sensory input, understand instructions, follow conversations, comprehend reading or instruction, and complete tasks that require quick cognitive processing. So this can manifest itself as like slow processing speed, or difficulty with visual or auditory perception. So what you're perceiving somebody is saying, or it might take you a little bit longer to understand what that person is saying, or maybe you need them to repeat it because you didn't catch all of it. This is a big one for me. That I'm like, wait, what did you just say? And then, so some characteristics of deficits in processing of information is having trouble understanding what others are saying, or needing more time, taking more time to understand and follow directions, having trouble following storylines in television shows and movies. I have a hard time with conversations a lot with this. And then taking longer to read and understand written information, even if it's something that you like a magazine or a book that you're especially interested in, and newspapers. reacting slowly to changes or warning signs in the surroundings. Now, if you have seizures, they do take your license away for 6 months. But I do notice that it takes all of my attention when I am driving. So I'm like a little bit whooped after because it's slower reaction time, more stimuli, and that could get you in trouble if you're not acting quickly enough because people drive crazy. And then taking longer to carry out physical tasks, including routine activities such as getting dressed or cooking. I know that was especially hard for me in the beginning after my surgery. It was just exhausting to do, tasks that I would have done without any issues prior to this. And so, that's frustrating. It does get better with if you get physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. But here's a couple strategies. Again, this is not all inclusive, but just some that I picked. And I'm just going to go through like decreasing distractions, which helps also with attention and executive functioning. So like turning off the television and silencing your phone so you can fully focus on what you're trying to understand, allowing more time to think about the information before moving on, and then rereading information as needed, breaking down activities into smaller segments, and doing those one by one instead of getting overwhelmed. Attention. What are the characteristics? Attention is the ability to actively process specific information in the environment while tuning out other details. It's like a highlighter or spotlight that makes what we focus on stand out. However, attention is limited in both terms of capacity and duration. So, how much can we hold and for how long? Characteristics of attentional difficulties: distracted more easily, having trouble finishing tasks. Again, there's a lot of overlap, as you can see. Switching attention from one task to another, learning and remembering new information, which is actually, I believe, the next slide, learning and memory, but difficulty holding long conversations or focusing on one conversation when when a lot of people are talking. Just tuning out those details. So those are more difficult. Some strategies for attentional difficulties, and this nice little chart kind of breaks it down to assignments. You can allow extra time for assignments. This is specifically important in schools. Distractibility, maybe seat the student in the front row, develop a private signal to refocus attention, like just like your hand on your finger on your ear, or like tap on the desk to get them back to paying attention. Disruptive behavior, you could increase the distance between desks if there's a problematic or peer or even a friend. Then organization, maybe setting up binders with the student, and then having dividers, folders, color coding. Again, these won't work for everyone, but there are many options to try. So never give up. Just it doesn't work for one person, works for another, and so on and so forth. Fidgety or restless behavior, allowing the student breaks or like to run errands or stand at their desk. A lot of teachers like to have students sitting properly, but we have found through the years that if they need to stand or they need to bounce on a ball, or they need, as long as they're paying attention, then that's what we're aiming for. And then social challenges, plan teacher directed activities to encourage social interaction, and then like rewarding the student for good behavior and acknowledging that with praise or positive reinforcement. Next is learning and memory. So characteristics, the definition of learning and memory are closely related processes that involve acquiring, retaining, and retrieving information. So learning is the process of acquiring the new knowledge or skills, while memory is the ability to recall that information. So you take it in, manipulate it in your head, and then give it back. Are you able to do that? So some characteristics of difficulty with memory and learning, specifically in CCM. Difficulty with logic, problem solving, reasoning. Here we go again, slower to respond. Difficulty remembering facts. Struggling with grade level work. Difficulty storing new information. They call that encoding, and that has to do with your working memory. Difficulty retrieving old information. So sometimes, like my long term memory is much better than my short term memory. I can't remember what I was like just doing, but I can remember stories from 20 years ago. I won't date myself saying 30. Sequencing events, physical and verbal perseverations, like repeating a word or an action or a phrase over and over again. Poor judgment and reasoning skills. Okay, lots of strategies for learning and memory. I will just briefly read off or shorten the strategies listed here. I'm a big fan of repetition, repeating things over and over, allowing more time for processing. So, give that student wait time after asking a question or maybe rephrasing it. And then give assignments to shorten assignments to the minimum necessary. So, if you know the student knows how to multiply, then maybe don't give them as many questions. If you know that they know the skill, we just want to make sure that they're successful, and then gradually increase that as the student is successful. Okay, behavior and social emotional functioning. This is how well someone understands and manages their own feelings while navigating others' feelings and interactions with others. So, as you can read along with me, characteristics are emotional control, social interactions, behavior regulation, empathy, feeling for others, like stepping in their shoes, ability to maintain and build relationships with peers and adults, using and responding appropriately to different social cues, like if somebody's like rolling their eyes or like looking really bored, are you figuring that out along the way and changing the topic? Mood swings and emotional ability. This was one, especially if you're some medications can cause this, that have to do with your brain or seizures. Also just the change or where the lesion may be located. Irritability, anger, insomnia, like having difficulty sleeping, risky behavior taking, verbal and physical outbursts, emotional changes, and then depression, anxiety, and then being self-aware. Some strategies, again, here's a lot of them, but I will just read through a few of them. Sorry. If the student is showing behaviors that need to be changed, a big thing that I'm a proponent of is for them to behavior analyst to conduct, or school psychologist to conduct a functional behavior assessment, figure out what the student needs and why they're behaving that way, and then developing a positive behavior support plan for academic or social skills. Sometimes if you just have a conversation with the student and have them agree, they might just sign off on a behavior contract, and that's it. It's not always that easy, obviously. Explicitly teach and model strategies for de-escalation to staff, because staff are not always, familiar with what to do. And then always, again, I say refer to the expert, which in this case would be the school counselor or school psychologist, and see if they need counseling services, whether that be individual or group, maybe for coping strategies or social skills. And last is communication. So thinking difficulties like a brain injury or CCM can make it harder to communicate with others. And so it might result in difficulty with expressive language, like what you're saying, how you're getting your point across, receptive language, which is understanding, speech or writing. And then sometimes you can't come up with the word, like a word retrieval, or like really when somebody has a really big difficulty with that, they might be diagnosed with aphasia, so they're not able to really get to the word, or it takes them much longer. So they need to give again, that long wait time, sometimes social communications, participating in conversations, and starting and stopping conversations. I know I can't get to my point. And people will say I may have been like that before, but like this time around, I really can't really figure out where I was going with it sometimes. And that again overlaps with attention. Okay. I jumped, sorry. So strategies, I would say that it's best practice for the evaluation team to either include or refer to a speech and language pathologist, whether that person is in whether that person is in the building, that the school district, or it might be even online these days, to assess for speech and language difficulties. However, some strategies that are helpful for deficits in communication are like maybe asking open-ended questions such as tell me about, or giving them yes or no choices because they might not be able to come up with the wording. Give the student time to organize his or her thoughts, ask them to repeat what was said so you can check for understanding, and then pairing verbal stimuli with visuals, and any kind of multimodal learning. So seeing, saying, see it, do it, say it, any one of the senses that you can use, or all of the senses, as many you can, then it's easier for anybody, brain injury or not, to encode or learn something. Okay, so how do we access school services? The first, and I don't have this written on here, but I do have it in the slides, the slide deck, but is to get an emergency plan in place, which is when you're gonna, as soon as you find out about CCM, your child has CCM or you have CCM, and your child's getting tested genetically or outside, let them know, let the school know immediately, and they'll put an emergency plan in place. This should include the nurse and anybody who works with your child. It's just going to come up. It's just going to be like a piece of paper with symptoms, allergies, list of people to reach in case of emergency, list of doctors and hospitals that are treating your child. What medications are they on? What's their list of restricted activities? But at the same time, and more importantly, or not maybe more importantly, but similarly important, is you want to request an evaluation. Oh, I clicked. I got too excited. Next. There we go. Okay. So you're going to provide the school with a written request. It has to be written, because if it's verbal, then the countdown doesn't begin. Once it's in writing and you ask, I would say to send it specifically to the principal, or any administrator in the building, because sometimes it gets lost with teachers, and maybe if they're new, they don't know what to do. And so once they receive that written request, they have to, within 60 days, generally within 60 days, depends on the state, they have to have completed this evaluation. And so you can read through that as to what it said. This is just a sample. If you Google sample evaluation requests, you can find plenty of options as to what you can write. But it can be basic, and it just has to say that I want my child I want them to be evaluated for this, and this, or just in general that you want them evaluated by the special education services. Okay, so this is long and visually overstimulating for me. I don't know about you, but this is the special education process, starting from the initial referral and evaluation process. So you can read through this on your own once you get the slides, but I wanted to just tell you, like, the general synopsis of this is that you make the request, which we just discussed, in writing, and then the team will schedule a meeting to discuss the referral and decide on what areas are going to be evaluated on. And then you have to sign that to complete the evaluation as a parent. And then the form will include what areas will be assessed. So we're looking at cognitive, academic, maybe fine motor, gross motor. We're going to be looking at records. We're going to be looking at medical history. We're going to be possibly speech, possibly adaptive PA. And then also pretty much included in any initial referral is going to be like biopsychosocial, so behavior and social emotional functioning, to see what is needed there. And then the evaluation is conducted. Again, like I said, it's usually within 60 days. It changes by state, from state to state, but that's generally what I've seen across the states that I am specifically certified in. And a copy of the evaluation report will be given to the parent. Excuse me. And that evaluation report should be given to the parent before the evaluation team meeting, but it's it, it's hard to come by. So if you want it for sure, so you can understand what is going on, which is very important, and make that very clear that you want it ahead of time. But it is the law for them to give it ahead of time, especially if you request. And then the meeting will be held to discuss the evaluation results, and the team, which includes an administrator, or what we call an LEA, which is a local educational administrator, a general ed teacher, so just like a regular general ed teacher, and then a special education teacher, the school psychologist, the parent has to be there, and then the student, if they are 14 years or older, they can also participate, or they have to participate, or they should, after 14 plus. If they want to earlier, I would suggest that. It's very, very helpful for them to understand what's going on and why you're doing what you're doing with them, and for them to have buy-in and understand, what to do if in the future to self-advocate. And then parents need to sign off on that to develop an IEP, which is an individualized educational program, which we will talk about in a moment. So what's the importance of a timely evaluation after traumatic brain injury, or after you find out about CCM, whether there are or are not visible symptoms or any deficits at this point? Even if there's not, it's still important to let the team know and keep monitoring. So the accurate identification of the cause of the student's disability to increase understanding by the team. And then it also helps with services for the future, and establishing SSI if they qualify. Okay, here are evaluation components that are typical. I will let you read through this. I just kind of ran through it off the top of my head. But the cognitive testing, which assesses like what are you capable of, what are your processing and problem solving abilities. We used to call it IQ testing. Now we call it cognitive testing. The next is achievement. So we look at reading, writing, and math skills based on age and grade. This is all done one-on-one with a school psychologist, sometimes maybe a teacher for the academic part. And then interviews, questionnaires, and this can be conducted in person, via the phone, email. Google Forms is now a big one that we use, and it just generates the information quickly into a report. And the interviews and questionnaires are with family, parents, guardians, students, teachers, whoever is important in the child's life, to gather medical, social, emotional, and academic history. And then observation. So the school psychologist will observe the student in class to see their functioning, learning styles, and whether there are interventions in place and if they are effective. And then they call this psychological evaluation, but this is the emotional, social, emotional, and behavioral rating scales, questionnaires. And again, they will be given out to students, a parent, and at least one teacher. And then other evaluations. Memory is important, specifically for TBI or CCM, because that's most likely impacted. And then speech and language may be included. occupational therapy, physical therapy, and mobility and orientation. How much time do we have left? Okay, I think we're doing well. Okay, so the eligibility meeting. At the eligibility meeting, which is after the evaluation is conducted, you will sit down with the team of people that I specified earlier and review the results of the evaluation. And then you're going to have a conversation about whether your child is eligible for an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, which is special education services. So to answer that, you have to say, does the child have a disabling condition that fits into one of the eligibility categories, which I will go through in a moment. But that answer is generally yes, because CCM falls under TBI. The second part of that question is the big part. Does it have an adverse effect on your child's education? If there are symptoms that we discussed earlier, then the answer is generally yes. But you would want to definitely keep an eye on it if it's not symptomatic or problematic, to make sure that that it doesn't become, or if it becomes that, then we can jump right to special education. So if it's yes, if you say yes that they are eligible for special education, then you would draft an IEP and discuss related services eligibility, which is OT, PT, speech, and all those things. And then if no, the team may consider monitoring with a 504 accommodation plan. But that's probably a lot of educational jargon. So I'm going to try and make it a little bit more understanding, make you understand it better. So before you can make that informed decision, you must understand the following. Okay, so the available options in school to support a child, there's two major options. So we have a 504 accommodation plan and an IEP, or an individualized education program plan. Both exist to address the needs of individuals with physical, medical, and or cognitive conditions that directly impact education. So let's start with the least restrictive option, which is a 504 accommodation plan. A 504 plan provides support so that a student with a disability can learn alongside their peers in general education. To qualify for a 504 plan, a student must have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major activities. So it could substantially limit eating, sleeping, walking, reading, paying attention, learning in general. And those are generally the ones that we look at in schools. And substantially limits is intentionally broad because it's hard to define, right? And can include conditions that may not directly impact academic performance, but still create significant challenges. So this came out of making schools more accessible. So are there ramps, or there elevators, things like that. But it could be like, more broad than that. So this distinction allows for more inclusive eligibility under Section 504. So it's much easier to qualify for a 504 plan, which, as I noted here, provides accommodations only, and then more on that in a few minutes. Next is the IEP, Individualized Education Program. It's an IEP is a written plan outlining a student's individualized educational needs and goals developed collaboratively by parents, teachers, educators, and other professionals. IEP falls under the federal law Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004. Under IDEA, a student qualifies, or a child qualifies for an IEP if their disability adversely impacts their educational performance and they require specialized instruction to access the curriculum. So adversely impacts means the disability significantly affects academic or functional performance, often in ways that are measured through standardized testing and other assessments. This is a stricter standard compared to a Section 504, and an IEP provides accommodations and modifications. And I know we're running low on time, Darla. I will try to speed through this. So an IEP allows for both modifications and accommodations. A modification is what an IEP will provide, and it's changing what is taught to the student or what the student is expected to learn. So it alters the curriculum. So you're might be learning different things than other students. You might get fewer questions. You might be given lower level text. If you have difficulty reading, you might be doing alternative projects, shortened assignments, and then maybe the grading scale is adjusted. And then an accommodation, which is only allowed for a 504, but also can be included in an IEP. I know this is very confusing, but it changes how the student will learn the same materials appears and alters the environment, not the curriculum. So you can be given breaks. If you have a difficult time with print, then we can make it larger. You might get additional time to take tests or do projects or homework. You might be put in a small group setting for testing. You might be given the use of assistive technology, which you're also given in an IEP or a 504. So, but preferential seating the student close to the teacher. Now, these are just a list of accommodations and modifications for a student with a TBI or a CCM. So I'm not going to go through them, but you can read through them once you get the link for yes. So with the disability categories, what are they and why do they matter? Well, for our purposes, to qualify, the student needs to have a disability that impacts their school or learning. And so you can read through this. Specific learning disabilities, like one of the most common. But traumatic brain injury, like I said, was added in 1990, and that's what our students will qualify, or anybody with CCM. Brain injuries are different because we face unique challenges compared to those with other disabilities. And some of our symptoms are visible, like balance or vision issues. But, and I find this the hardest part of having CCM, some of them are invisible, like you look fine. And so some of those, like emotional regulation or memory problems, can impact learning, processing. You seem to be processing okay, but like it's definitely diminished from prior to the CCM. Each brain injury varies, and symptoms can fluctuate daily. For me, sometimes hourly. Unlike visible signs, TBI may not show outward signs, leading to assumptions of full recovery. And so ongoing assessments are vital to monitor skill mastery. Here's some quotes about hidden disabilities. I will let you read through them. We are running out of time. Related services. So IDEA and 504 defines related services. So this would also be a part of your plan as transportation or other developmental corrective and supportive learning services that assist your child to benefit from education. So you can read through this again. I mentioned about 7 times speech, PT, OT are the main ones, but there are also some other things that may be important for you to advocate. So now that we have this much, basic knowledge of schools and disabilities, we can say, go back to this eligibility meeting and say, yes, they do have a TBI. Yes, they do have a disability and it is TBI. Does it adversely affect the child's education? So because it's related to a specific event, accommodations on an IEP might not be readily available. So it might be often appropriate to start with the 504, and then if the symptoms remain, move on to an IEP. But document, because again, like we said, these problems can be quickly forgotten and they're often invisible. Always, plan for medical issues such as fatigue, sleep, seizures, and so on and so forth. So if So if the answer is yes, then they would go to get an IEP. If it's no, it's section 504. I included a sample 504 plan that you can review, but the main point of that is that it's less formal than an IEP, and it can be typed, it can be written. I've seen all kinds of things. It can be simple or complex, short or long, but the basic takeaway here is like, from my standpoint as an educator, if you want accountability, and you want to see if goals are met, then an IEP is the way to go, because this doesn't formally take it in accountability. For me, I say 504 plans are good teaching. But that's the difference. That's the main takeaway. So there's 5 main components of an IEP. I will let you read through them because it's all very complex. But let's talk about advocating for our child, which is the end of the presentation. You are your child's best advocate. Never back down from fighting from what you feel is right for your child. So what is advocacy? Standing up for their rights, promoting their best interest, being a voice for the voiceless. How you advocate: communicate effectively, gather information, be persistent, do not give up, involve your child as they get older. The advocacy process is important for them to see modeled, so you can teach them also how to advocate for themselves when they get older. And then seek support, connect with other parents. CCM has great resources for people who have similar experiences, and this is how I've learned everything about it. Why are we going to advocate? Because I love quotes, by the way. I will speak for you. I will fight for you. I will advocate for you so that one day you can do it for yourself. So that's the main reason why we want to ensure that they access all the resources that they need to improve their outcomes. And by advocating for your child, you can help them achieve their potential and live a happy, fulfilling life. And I said happy, but healthy also. And it empowers your child to speak up for themselves in the future. And these actually are live links. So when you do get the PowerPoint presentation, you can click on them. But these are helpful hints about how to best advocate for your child. And parents, guardians, as advocates, never leave the house without your advocacy toolkit. Click on the toolbox here. So you can when you click open here. I won't do it because it'll take me somewhere I don't know where to get back from. But do not leave the house without this. Up here, the link will take you to an advocacy toolkit for you and your child. The goal is to model, teach, and practice advocacy. This will ensure a successful transition to self-advocacy for your child, from you to them. And finally, I heard this cute little story, which I'm sure you all have heard some way, in some shape or form. This woman was on a much needed vacation to Hawaii with her family. The flight attendant was going through her pre-flight instructions and said, "The cabin is pressurized for your comfort, but in the event of an emergency, the oxygen mask will automatically appear. If you are traveling with young children, put your own oxygen mask on first and then put the mask on your children." Aha, I thought, that is it. Those instructions got me to thinking about taking care of ourselves, especially in our daily lives, since we tend to go around putting oxygen masks on everyone else. Sometimes we forget to put our own oxygen mask on first. So today, take this pledge with me, aloud or not, or laugh with me. In order to advocate and take care of others, we must take care of ourselves and learn how to find self-care and make that important part of your day. So I pledge to secure my mask first. And Mr. Softy truck, you can hear. To end my presentation, I present to you 100 ways to relieve stress. I try to do one of these at least weekly, if not daily. And sometimes it's really actually fun. Makes you feel like a kid again. So it's 8:00 on the dot. I apologize. Time for a little Q&A.
We're
What
gonna move the Q&A over
yeah.
to support group. So I just put
Okay.
the link a couple of times. Thank you so, so much, Carla. That was really, really
Sure.
interesting,
I
helpful.
know it was a lot.
It's a lot. I mean,
Lots
the
got
amount of
changed.
information that happens with all of this school stuff and IEPs and 504s and I mean there's so much to cover. So you did a great job
There is
condensing
too
it
much.
to an hour.
Thank you.
Um, yeah,
So we're gonna go.
we're
Yeah,
gonna
it
move
is a
over to
lot, but
support group. So if you want to, if you have questions, you want to
yeah,
join
I'll
us
jump
over at
over there.
support group, we will dig more into it over there. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this out. Thank you again, Carla.
Thank
Thanks everyone
you.
for
Thank you,
coming.
everyone. And
Um,
um, I will drop my well, I'll just see you over there, but my email in case you guys have specific questions.
Perfect. And you can always email me if you if
Okay,
anybody has more stuff afterwards. All
sounds
right.
good. All right, I'll
Thanks
see you.
again, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.